And good evening, and welcome to Wellness Wednesday here on Indigo Worship Live Show. We are so glad that you took the time to join us tonight on a wonderful, wonderful Wednesday evening. As always, do me a favor. Hey, like the page right here on Facebook at Indigo Worship Live Show, and also on Instagram. You can follow us right there at official Indigo Worship. But tonight is a Wellness Wednesday, and we like to call this evening an Indigo Inspire Night. And so tonight we've got an amazing topic for you that many don't want to confront sometimes, but we are going to go and take a deep dive into the subject of trauma. And so tonight we are excited to have an expert in this area and field to help us navigate through this process with renowned clinician, Armina Domingue. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I am so glad to have you here because we were talking about trauma and what it has been doing in the lives of people, particularly within our culture and the silence and the stigma that is around it. So here we are tonight in a one of two-part series. And I want to thank you so much for being a part of this series of tonight and next Wednesday to really start going into a conversation that many don't want to approach, including the church and even within our community at large. So before we begin, let everyone know who you are and exactly, some of the credentials, which are arm's length long, but this to our audience. Go ahead.
Oh, so my name is Armina Domingue, and I am a licensed social worker. I have birthed this company, this firm called Candor Consulting Firm. And Candor Consulting Firm is a safe place where people can get all of their needs met. So we do counseling, we do individual counseling, marriage counseling, couples counseling, family counseling, and that's one side of the house. And then on the other side of the firm's house, we do executive coaching, where we provide coaching to executives. So maybe your 3 C's, like your CEO, your COO, your CFOs, and managers, to really help their employees navigate the workspace, and so that they are emotionally healthy and that they are providing all the things that they need so that the employees can produce whatever the product is at the end. And so in a nutshell, that's what Candor Consulting Firm does. But Armina is this Christian who loves the Lord and has been commissioned to help people live life to their fullest, whatever that means for them, because everyone has a different potential level. And so that's who I am, and that's what we do.
Awesome. Now, this subject of trauma that we're going to be talking about can come in various forms and can be triggered by various circumstances, be it from the youngest to even the oldest. So let's go into first of all, what is trauma, just from a definition standpoint?
Trauma is this pandemic. So can we just start right there, okay? Trauma is any event that alters or affects the mind and body. It's the mind and body's reaction, right, to like an event. So trauma isn't the event, it's our response to the event. And so when I think of 2020, all of us that are watching this now have lived through some event called this COVID-19/pandemic that is enough for us to walk away traumatized. And we throw that word traumatized or trauma around a lot, but it is so deep, and it's not a word to just throw around because it really hits you to the core. It's like this thing that lies in your belly and just stays there. And then there are things that happen, you may be driving in a car, for example, and you're at a light, and you flash back to 20 years ago when something happened, not even on that street corner, not even in that intersection, but trauma sometimes rears its ugly head when we don't take care of it, right? So if you go to the doctor and they tell you have diabetes or they tell you have hypertension, there are things that you must do in order to keep it at bay, in order to be cured from it, in order to be healed from it. Trauma is no different. And so tonight we're going to talk about some of those things. We're going to talk about some of the signs, like what to look for, because oftentimes we're misdiagnosed. We go in and trauma looks one way, and it's not really that, or we go in and it's something else. And I'll give you a really quick example. In the Black and Brown communities, right? Many of our children are diagnosed with ADHD. I mean, a multitude of them. When a trauma specialist like myself starts to talk with the family, we uncover that it's not really ADHD, but it's trauma. But what they're exhibiting are symptoms that look like ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of that, someone slaps an ADHD diagnosis on them. And the problem with that is they never get the true healing they need because we're treating something that doesn't even exist.
Wow. Okay. So they're being misdiagnosed.
Yeah. So when it comes to trauma, trauma doesn't look like trauma. It looks like other things. It manifests like other things. And so what ends up happening is if we don't ask the right questions, then we end up walking away with something totally different.
Wow. So when we're talking about the exhibition of behaviors, be it within younger children and even adults, that can also just sort of be reflecting that we are maneuvering through this life, but we're not maneuvering in our authentic self. We're actually coming from a place of trauma and trying to navigate this, pushing stuff down when honestly, that's not who we are. And we're just we're trying so hard to not address what the elephant in the room, and in particular, the elephant in our mind,
Yes.
the elephant in our body, the elephant within our family dynamics.
Yes. Listen, I tell my clients all the time, stop picking up the leg of the elephant and dusting under the table and putting the elephant leg down, because that elephant is going to be comfortable on your couch. It's going to be comfortable on your coffee table. You actually have to get rid of the elephant.
Yes.
And so what we do is we scurry around the issues. And in our Black and Brown communities, we're really good for saying what you hear here stays here. Don't go outside and tell nobody our business. Don't tell them about Uncle so-and-so who has you sitting on his lap and it makes you feel uncomfortable. What do you mean that's Uncle so-and-so? Why would he make you feel uncomfortable? Trauma is real. The things that lead up, these events that lead up to the feelings, it exists. And we don't have to go past the pandemic to talk about that we're really living in an event that could cause some trauma. We're being isolated.
Yes.
We're being told one thing and then it's something else. We don't know what this is. We don't know how to maneuver it. And for many of us in the church communities, is who I'm really going to speak to right now, we have been used to fellowshipping every weekend in a building called a church.
Yeah.
And that was I remember we went to church March. The next week, bam, it was like no church. Like, wait, what do you mean by no church? Like, what am I supposed to now do on the weekends? Like, church was like part of my life and I was involved in ministry. Now, what does that even look like now? And literally, it has taken the church a very long time to try to recreate something for their members so that we don't feel the isolation, so that we don't feel the emotional drain and sensation that's coming from trying to figure this thing out.
Well, and the only problem about that, the big problem about that is we have been thrust into something we've never experienced before within our generation, within our grandparents' generation. This thing was even 100 plus years ago. So between the faith-based community, between the community at large, we have never had anything like this called a pandemic that has now shut everything down. We've been isolated now in our homes, which, like you said, is trauma in and of itself. The trauma of, oh my goodness, now the parent who worked outside the home has to figure out how she's going to homeschool or homeschool their child. Their parents have to figure that out. Now the jobs you used to go to, now they're not going to. Now we got to work from home while we're helping the child. Then we have friends, loved ones becoming ill, dying, passing away from COVID-19, from other things. So all the combined elements are making for a tsunami of, to me, seems like exhibition of behaviors that are traumatic, that come out of trauma, but we're not calling it trauma. And what I think the thing you alluded to is when and if we come out of this, what are we going to see? Where are people going to be in their minds? How they're going to be functioning? And so we really want to just kind of go into a little bit of that in terms of Like, okay, right now, let's focus on young children. They're being isolated from their friends. Some of them are in family situations that are very horrific right now. And you mentioned the thing about, Uncle so and so. Well, it could be brother or even sister. It could be mother, or it could be father. And so we have sexual things that are going on where before they had release to go to church or go to school. Now I'm closed in with my offender.
Mhm.
And so the trauma of all of that, and I can't get out of here. Um, where do you see as a clinician some of these things happening, and how are you, really providing some tools for them and assistance for them in these kind of situations?
So let me just say to you this way, right? Basically, trauma is the result of extraordinary stressful events that disrupts a person's sense of safety, security, and leads to feeling of vulnerability and helplessness. Now tell me that's not this pandemic that we're in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So when you say when we get out of it, sister, I have people calling me now that are in the thick of it, and they don't know what to do. So it's not like, so yes, when we get out of it, there's going to be more people, because now the norm, or what we knew that was the norm, is no longer going to be. There's
Mm-hmm.
going to be a new creation of what life is going to be like moving forward, when all things are lifted, if things get lifted to the degree where it was before.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are high anxiety, because first it was, what is this?
Yeah.
Now it's, should I take the vaccine or not? Is it safe or not? So, you know, that's creating some anxiety in people themselves.
Yeah.
Kids, I have children on my caseload who all they had to do was show up to class and they would pass. They just showed up. You were physically in the space. You maybe answered a question or two. Now, these kids have to remember to submit their assignment. Oh, did you check the email? Did you check the Google this? Did you
Mm-hmm.
upload this? Did you upload that? And they are struggling.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about the parent or the sibling or the family member who may be using this opportunity for sexual advances.
Mm-hmm.
What about the parent who has checked out because they're so depressed that they don't have a job, they don't know how they're going to pay their bills, while they're making arrangements with the creditors and the landlords and the banks? Those things are arrangements. When this is over, you're going to be hit like whoosh, you're
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
pay those things back.
Yeah.
And so I have kids on my caseload who are like, I'm fending for myself and I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
So we, the clinicians, we're not just seeing this or waiting for it to be over to see it. We're experiencing this with our clients. And I use what's called cognitive behavioral therapy, because a situation is just that. Situations have no life. We give it life. And the life we give it is our perception of the thing, right? And so if we're able to see this thing differently, then our thoughts about the thing is different, our feelings about the thing is different, and our behaviors are different. But if we go in and we just see it for what it is, our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are always going to be skewed. So I teach my clients how to look at the glass pretty much being half full than half empty, or no water in it at all.
Mm-hmm.
And
So
so,
for those who don't understand that clinical term of cognitive behavior therapy, just kind of give as if I were a 2-year-old explanation of what that means.
yep. So cognitive behavioral therapy is a way to teach you how to look at things differently so that you feel different and that you behave different. That's it. Now, there's a whole lot of terms that come with that, but the idea is helping people see a situation differently. And if you are a Christian or if you are a person of faith, how does your faith play into your healing process?
Yeah.
Is it just that you're a faith goer just to say you are? Or do you rely on the promises that Jesus gave us in the Bible? Do you rely on all of the things that happened and we saw the miracles of those things, and then we call it back to Christ and say, look, I'm struggling with this, but I remember in the Bible day when you did X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I'm explaining my techniques to people, I'm like, how would you feel if I told you that we could look at this very same situation differently and walk away with a different perspective? Would that change your mind about therapy?
No, it may, but I'm going to tell you something. For somebody who has really experienced, maybe say, let's say, sexual trauma, They have been molested for several years. How are you using that cognitive behavior therapy, or are you using something else completely different to help someone navigate through the process? Because there's a lot of trauma, not just to the physical being, but to the spirit and to the mind, and how they feel about the world around them, and trust issues and all those other things, which is a lot. So how do you approach, what's your approach concerning that?
So sexual abuse is probably one of the most deepest trauma because it impacts so much of a person. But building a safe space is always going to be first. Like we're not digging deep into your sexual abuse history on day one, day two, maybe not even the third month. A safe space has to be created for the person who is coming, that they feel when they come that they can actually be vulnerable to talk about what has happened without feeling judged, without feeling all of those things. But in the same manner, also helping them to see the situation for how they see it, right? How has it impacted their life up until this point? And meaning, like, how are they behaving? What are some things that they struggle with that we can start to chip away at? So with sexual victims, I tend to start in the here and now and move back versus starting way back when and coming forth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because we want to really examine the behaviors of the person, because when you're coming to therapy and you have trauma, it's because you're in crisis. You're like at your last limb. So when you're coming in, it's almost like, look, I can't do this thing anymore, so I need help with this. And if those are not the words, their behaviors say it, right? So getting the person to identify, what are they feeling? What are some things that trigger you? What happens when you are walking in the store and you see someone that reminds you of X, Y, and Z? What do you do? When this feeling or the thought comes up, what do? Do you go shopping? Do you avoid it? Do you sit in the feelings? What do you do? And so getting them to sort of verbalize how they feel and what they're doing, and then making the connecting the dots for them. And so that is the approach. I mean, again, it is all under this whole cognitive thing, because we're talking about how are you perceiving this thing, because the way you perceive the situation is your feelings and your thoughts about the situation and your behavior.
Absolutely. So here we are. We're in March of 2021. We have been in this pandemic. It will be next week will be 1 year. I know in the Philadelphia area, where we live at, as of March the 13th, everything was shut down. So we're on a 1 year anniversary. So much has happened in this past year for many people. And so as we are in this, and as you mentioned earlier, there are many things that have happened, job losses, financial, situations, all those other things that kind of come along with it. And so we are just sitting here in a crisis, trying to pretend that we're not in a crisis. And how would you sort of encourage people, don't live in the crisis, just say, I really do need help and I'm struggling and I don't know where to turn? What would be some of the initial things you kind of can guide in terms of that direction?
So for me, relationship is everything, because if I don't have a relationship with you and I don't trust you, I'm not going to open up. And I think that's many of us, right? And so research is really good too, to kind of see what's out there. Who's doing this work? Who's doing work on anxiety? Who's doing work on trauma? Who's doing work on coping through the pandemic? And one of the things I will say in the clinical field is that when the pandemic hit, we are in this with everyone else. So we too got rocked. And then we found our footing and decided to create platforms to address what's happening. And so there are a lot of free stuff out there. There's a lot of workbooks. There's a lot of self-help things. Even if you don't want to talk to someone about what's going on, you can try to do the work on your own. But I think, Patrice, before we even talk about that, like, what are some of the symptoms? Because how do I know that I am being affected by what's going on right now? And I think oftentimes we don't know what those symptoms are, from the physical symptoms to the emotional symptoms. So we think, well, that doesn't apply to me because I'm not going through that.
Mhm.
And again, trauma is very like, it lies underneath, right? So it just waits for that right opportunity to rear its ugly head. But if you know what your triggers are, if you know what some of the symptoms are, then maybe you can say, should I talk to someone? And during this pandemic, I mean, if you go to psychologytoday.com, and that's like the easiest website to blurt out and to promote,
Mhm.
because you can filter that website with thousands of people who are on there to help. So you can say, if I want a male therapist, you can filter it to man or male or female or black and brown or Caucasian or whatever it is that you feel you can connect to. You can filter it down. You can even filter it down to trauma. You can even filter it down to anxiety. And the people who specialize in that is going to pop up for you. Because ultimately, no one enjoys living in a traumatic experience all day long. No one enjoys that.
Yeah.
No one enjoys being startled. No one enjoys feeling hypervigilant or racing heartbeats or aches and pains or fatigue. No one enjoys that. You know, with the COVID and the symptoms, sometimes they look alike. Remember, I talked about ADHD and how,
Mhm.
you know, so sometimes we have to rule things out to get to the bottom of like, what is this? This pandemic definitely has a lot of us on edge. By right, it should. So, you know, if I'm in the market and you're standing too close to me online, I'm giving you a side eye because you're not following the rules right now, right?
Mhm.
Whereas before this, I mean, I'll be the one on the line striking conversations with people like, how's it going? What's
Yeah.
going on?
Mhm.
Now
Mhm.
I'm like, I ain't talking to them because I don't know what and where they've been. So it's caused some edginess and agitation for many of us. But the most important thing to also keep in mind is some of us are not sleeping.
Yeah.
We're not sleeping. And when we do fall asleep, guess what? We have nightmares. So what happens? We get up again. And so knowing what some of these symptoms are would really be, you know, helpful. And I just gave some of the physical symptoms of trauma, but some of the emotional ones go from being shocked, in denial, disbelief, feeling unsafe, anger, irritable, mood swings, guilt, shame, self blame, sadness, depression, feelings of hopelessness.
Yeah.
These are all things like if we're experiencing them that we should talk to someone about.
But we're in a community once again that says, you know, we don't go tell my business. And we are in, if particularly if we're also in a faith-based community, we like to say, you know, girl, just or you know, or brother, just pray about it. Just pray about it. And use that as a way of not addressing the issue. And not we're not saying that prayer does not change things, but God has given tools and tools through individuals to be a conduit of healing. And that's one of the things that I want to make sure that we share. And for those that are watching tonight, you know, if you have any questions for Armina, please put them in the comments section, and we would love to be able to answer your questions tonight. So, Armina,
Can I just say one thing before you go on?
sure. Mm-hmm.
On even Psychology Today, you can find Christian counselors, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because especially for the faith-based community, a lot of times why we don't go to therapy is because we don't think they're going to understand us from a biblical standpoint or a Christian standpoint or even a faith-based standpoint. But there are Christian counselors out there who will use your beliefs in how you manage and cope with what's happening with you. And most of the therapists are offering a 30-minute free session or half price off just to see if you and them are a good fit. That doesn't mean you're committing, right? Because part of therapy is you got to commit. But initially, it's just a let's check each other out. And so I would encourage your audience to do just that. It doesn't mean you're committing. It doesn't mean you have to, you know, give the whole story of what's happened to you, but see if this person is a good fit for you. Because if they are, then you're more likely to trust them and more likely to be vulnerable in that safe space.
Absolutely. And you bring out an excellent point because not one therapist is a fit for everybody. It
Yes.
really is a connection. And, you know, does the clinician vibe with me and back and, you know, they're building that trust issue. And like you said, you're not going out the gate saying, okay, let me give you the past 10 years of all my trauma on day one. And whew, I'm so glad I did that. I think I'm healed.
Right.
No, it is a process because what's going to happen is as you are going through the process, you're also going to be stirring up old things that you didn't even realize were still there.
Yes. That's true.
and how you are navigating that, because now if you go into, as you said earlier, one of your techniques is you start where you are and then you work back, because you have to just take take those steps to go back. But when you hit that particular wall of sensitivity,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a reliving of that in the mind. You
Yes.
actually are in your mind, you can see the situation, you can smell
Mm-hmm.
the aroma, you can
Mm-hmm.
feel the touch as if it's happening in that moment. And so there's to me would be like a sense of, okay, I got to put my guard up now, because I'm living what I'm supposed to be getting healing from. How do you help that person when they get to that wall and things start becoming so familiar as if it's happening right now, to really kind of navigate that, like, okay, instead of not that fight or flight, even with therapy, like you said, you'll get to that place where you're just about there, and once you get there, they run.
Listen, in the therapy world, there's three things. There's the fight, the flight, or the freeze, the three F's, right? And a really good clinician can see one of those three things unfolding. And so my favorite question to my clients is, what is happening right now? Tell me right now, what are you experiencing? What are you thinking? What are you feeling right now? Like, oh, nothing. I'm like, so let me tell you what I see, right? Because maybe you're not noticing it, but I noticed that you crossed your legs, or you're
Mm.
moving around in the seat, or you're biting your bottom lip, or you're looking away as if you're looking for approval from someone that may be in the room, because now we're on this virtual platform, right? And so asking that question of what is happening in this moment for you. And one of the techniques I use is called grounding. And grounding is really bringing the person back to the present. And so I'm like, we're going to do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What are like 5 things? And I use the senses. Like, what do you see? What do you taste? What do you hear? What do you feel? And that helps the person focus on what is happening in front of them. Because I can't kind of listen for what I'm hearing in a moment if I'm still thinking about what happened 5 years ago.
Right.
And so the way the therapy world works is that the clinician sees and hears the things that the client is not saying. And so it's my job to pull those things out. Let me tell you, when a session is over, I am mentally drained, because I am like digging my heels in to get to the bottom of what's going on with you, so that you leave my space safe until the next time you come back. The other thing too is not asking people what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. That
Mm.
question is like,
Mm.
it's like the magical question, because it's like, oh, you don't think something's wrong with me? Because people usually, what's wrong with you? Why are you acting this way? But when I say, my goodness, what happened to you? That has like this whole power of like either tears start flowing, or this big sigh goes on, and then they start to talk. And so it is literally about building relationships with people and studying people. I people watch. I mean, I remember there were times in church and I'll be like, I need to, Lord, stop. I need to focus on what's happening. But I'm looking around and thinking, sister or brother so-and-so is hurting so much that they're in this building, in this space, looking for healing. And while this is one of the main things that they need, there's this other kind of healing that God has provided for them that they haven't even tapped into. And so churches need to have a resource on their website, if they have a website, of how to get help.
Yeah.
What are some crisis numbers? That way the saints don't have to call nobody. They can go right to the website, look on the resource page, and pull up those links that they need to make the call.
I love what you said, the difference between saying what's wrong with you as opposed to what happened. Because
Yes.
as soon as the way you said it and phrased it, it almost gave like a sense of comfort and validation that
Yeah.
something did happen to me and
Yeah.
someone sees my pain,
Yes.
instead of saying, well, what's wrong with you? As if they're now not giving validation to the fact that something did happen to me
Yeah.
and something is wrong. But you just now putting the fault, it almost comes across as if you're putting the blame on me in a strange way. Like
Yeah.
I'm the reason why X, Y, and Z happened.
Yes.
But in the sense, so when you're asking what happened,
Mm-hmm.
what's wrong, I am getting that sense of validation. And depending on who it is, maybe an opportunity and a doorway, at least to be able to share and release some of that valve emotional pressure that
Mhm.
can come when people are in traumatic situations and have past traumas.
Yeah, look, I have a client who we do this thing every week when we get together where she writes me love letters. And I call them that because she pours her heart out in the letter, but she doesn't want to talk about it in the session, but she wants me to know where she is.
Mhm.
And so storytelling has been a really good other thing that I use. And so I use her pain points because that's the stuck points of hers in storytelling to help her help this character figure out what it is that they need to do to get unstuck. And sometimes in the therapy world, you got to make stuff up on the fly, right? Because it's like someone is in front of you and they're looking at you like you're the expert, so fix this. And it's like, no, we're going to do this together. And the way we do it together is da 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 da. So yeah.
That's amazing. So you have this amazing firm that you started recently and
Yeah.
had an grand opening. It was absolutely amazing. I only could be on there for a couple of minutes,
Yeah.
but
Thank you.
Candor Counseling Firm. Tell us exactly how you started this and what made you want to venture out and really kind of be on your own providing these type of services.
So this pandemic truly is what kind of started this whole idea of I need to do this for the people, right? And I've always hustled. I had a side hustle of counseling as long as I've had my master's. And it was like a client here, a client there. And when the pandemic hit, I called a group of therapists and I said, listen, so we're in this pandemic. I'm like, how do you feel? They're like, girl, we're all in this together. I'm like, good, because I am as anxious as the people who are living this too.
Yeah.
And so we started this thing called Candor Conversation. And it was like very for real, very basic conversation, very much a space for people to be vulnerable and even us as the professionals, right? And so we started talking about what is anxiety? What does it look like? How do you cope with it? How do you help your children cope with it? And we had a moderator. And so we did that for weeks on end. I want to say kind of till the summertime. And then one of the therapists said to me, Armina, you should really open up your own private practice. I'm like, what? No, I am good where I am. She's like,
Yeah.
no, I'm serious. There's so much that you have to offer, but I feel like you're being boxed in working for someone. And I was like, ooh, that means I got to step out on faith. Like, what is that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so I literally birthed this firm for like 9 months. And last Wednesday, I was in labor and I delivered a beautiful firm called Candor Consulting Firm. And that's where all your needs get met. So if you think of a house, we have 2 levels. We have the counseling side and we have the executive coaching side. And on the counseling side, I have 2 other clinicians who, one is a trauma specialist like myself, and the other one is a marriage and family therapist. And so they kind of help support the whole family, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then on the coaching side, I have another coach of mine who we do coaching for CEOs, CFOs, COOs, and managers because you're expecting people to show up to a workspace in a pandemic. They're going to have struggles because like you said earlier, we left a 9 to 5 driving in every day. And for many of us, that was our escape from the horrible things happening at home.
Absolutely.
But now you put all of us in the space together, but my husband is abusive, my children are abusive, or the parent is abusive and the children have to live through this. It has been a horrific experience for some people.
Mm-hmm.
And so this firm is here to help people navigate and live to their fullest potential. And especially in this season, because we know that seasons change. So let's prepare for when we come out of this pandemic. Don't wait until we come out to say, oh my goodness, now what, right? And so the firm exists to help people navigate through these different challenges that they may be facing. And there is Candor Consulting Firm.
Well, we're going to put Armina's information up here for anyone that would love to explore their services, as well as you may know someone that you want to recommend their services to. And like she was saying, that it's not a one counselor fits all. It's an opportunity for you to get to know this counseling firm, find out if it's a good fit for you or a family member. And if it is, then you've got the expertise of Armina Domingue and her other counselors within her firm that are willing and ready to give you the assistance you need. Now, so Armina, while we have a few more minutes left, We are going to deep dive.
Yes.
So let's now go to the elephant in the room. There is sexual abuse going on, particularly with children, and they're in homes with their offenders. And right now, there may be someone else in the house who knows something is happening, and they don't know what to do. But we have this unspoken secret hack that we've made within our community that we just keep everything to ourselves, and don't you tell nobody what's going on here, and that's not nobody's business. But this child is suffering. And so if what can we do as a community if we even have an inkling that something is happening with a particular family and with a particular child as a community?
TELL, tell. And the way you tell is you find a trusted adult to talk to. There are so many resources that are unused resources out there for sexual abuse, sexual misconduct, because sometimes it could be very surface sexual stuff that's inappropriate going on. And so people think, well, there's no penetration, so like that's not a big deal. But it is. Whenever someone is violated, that's a big deal, right? And so we have to tell, because the person who's holding on to the secret, feels like this enormous amount of guilt because we're allowing this thing to happen. Yeah. And so there are rules, there are guidelines, there are programs that exist to protect the victim. And it's called victim services. Every city has in their city a victim service unit or victim service department. And if you don't want to tell, and if you don't know how to tell, you can always call with the what ifs questions. What if this is happening? What should I do? Will the person get in trouble? Because ultimately that is the end of it. It's like, we don't want to tell because we're afraid that this person is going to get in trouble. And I tell my families this all the time. If the 15-year-old brother is molesting the 8-year-old brother, or the 5-year-old sister, someone is doing it to the 15-year-old or exposing the 15-year-old to some inappropriate materials, right? And so there's a whole thing about safeguarding your house from sexual predators within the house. So the resources are out there, but the thing that I will say is find someone you trust that you can tell. Because one of the things that we think is that we're going to go into this alone. But that trust person, the person that you trust that you're telling, they're going to come with you, right? They're going to hold your hand and walk you along the way until justice is served, and whatever that means for the victim. So,
because a lot of people have, if they haven't experienced it in their own families, they know someone, could be a family member or friend, who has gone through this and is currently going through this with their child. And they really don't know what to do in order to give them the proper, guidance in terms of how to be of help to them and come alongside with them through this healing process, point them to your organization, point them to someplace else. And so I think like you said, those four letters, TELL, tell.
Yes.
That is the first step of getting help, being placed in a safe place or finding a safe place, as well as having the proper people to help now navigate the healing process for everybody involved, the child, the parent, and if it's a sibling or cousin or someone, there are ways to handle that as well. And when I say ways to handle it, I'm not saying to handle it in your own, and I'm talking about in a legal way.
Yeah.
Like you said, that.
Because the thing is, even the 60-something-year-old perpetrator, something happened to that person that's causing this behavior. So it just kind of all goes back full circle. And by telling, you're actually helping to stop generational curses. But we don't have time for that today, right? Yeah. And we don't talk about that too much, but at some point we have to sort of cut that off. And the way to do that is to find an adult that you trust to help you navigate this. So
absolutely. Now, we're going to be talking next week in part two of some ways that we can help utilize the healing process. And we're going to go deep diving more into that area. So, but let's start with one thing that you can use, in terms of as a little teaser for next week.
So I will tell you this, there is recovery from trauma. It is an individual process, right? And it looks very different for everyone. And the way we recover depends on what our resiliency is. It depends on what our coping levels are, our connection with other people in supportive environments, and even how we think. How we think, I can't stress that enough, is almost like the catalyst to how we heal. So that's all I got for you. That's a little tip I'm gonna give. I can dive deep into that next week. But there is recovery for trauma. You don't have to feel this way. You don't have to live this way.
Absolutely, absolutely. So for everybody that's on here, if before we sign off tonight, we just, like I said, this is a little bit of an introduction about trying to sort of lay the groundwork for our deep dive for next week. If you have any questions, if you don't want to put it in the comment section, you can directly DM Armina at Candor Conversations.
Yep.
Or Candor Counseling Firm.
Or Mia Naomi. They can find me on Facebook under MIANAOMI.
Okay. So with all that information, we are excited. I'm actually going to pin your counseling services within the comment section, so people that are watching it later tonight and tomorrow, they'll be able to connect with you. And Armina, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate this opportunity.
Oh, for sure. And I know it's been short, and it's a lot, because trauma is not just something that we can deep dive into all in one night, but we wanted to kind of lay the groundwork of where we were going with this. And hopefully if you'll join us next week, and also let someone know about this program, and also about Armina and the Candor Counseling Services firm that she has currently that can be of help to you in trauma, family therapy, as well as corporate therapy and counseling as well. So sure. Absolutely. So follow her, me and Naomi, follow her on Facebook at Candor Counseling Firm on Facebook, and always follow Indigo Worship here on Facebook, as well as on Instagram at Official Indigo Worship. So for everyone who has been joining us tonight, we will see you next week at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, talking with part two of trauma with my special guest, Armina Domingue, licensed therapist and clinician. So Armina, thank you so much for being here. Everybody that's been joining us, thank you so much. Have a wonderful night, and we will see you next week. And as always, here on Indigo Worship, it's not just a vibe, it's a whole mood. We'll see you next week.